I want to present some data that relates to this question of whether or not polls actually search for a real opinion. There was a question asked on I think it was a CNN Gallup poll prior to going into Iraq. Do you favor or oppose that we should go into Iraq? 59%, 38% said we should favor it. A friend of mine who was then running the Gallup poll did an experiment with this, and he did a follow-up question to that. He asked the people who said they were in favor of it, well, if we didn't go into it, would that bother you? And he asked the people who were opposed to going into Iraq, said, well, if we did, would that bother you? Okay, in other words, he's finding out how hard those opinions are. Results look very different now. You've got 41% who are saying, well, I kind of have a preference, but if it went the other way, I'm not really going to be that bothered by it. No. Not only are these numbers a lot lower, but the number who really favor it and the number who really oppose it are now virtually identical. Very different. This never made it into the press. And that's, by the way, the one theme that I have. The press does not seem to be able to handle nuance very well. It wants to give you one number for everything, even very complex issues. And if there's a subtext to my whole talk here today, it's that when you do that, you almost always lose a lot of information. This was not just one issue. Same experiment. Should we close the prison in Guantanamo? 53% said no. So the headline, of course, would be people oppose closing Guantanamo. Look what happens with the follow-up there. Again, the people who said they opposed were asked, would you be really upset if we did? The people who said we want to close it, well, if we didn't, would you be really upset? And if they said no, I wouldn't, they end up over here. 52% of the people really don't have strong opinions. And the opposition is still more than those who favor, but 28 to 19, that's a very different picture. Should we develop an anti-missile system? Look at that and you say, well, 2 to 1 in favor, right? Well, if we probe it to see how strongly people feel, well, it's 2 to 1, but 3 people out of 5 haven't thought about it much or don't have very much of an opinion on it. Very different thing. Now, to go back to electoral politics, this is really interesting, and it explains some of the early volatility. This is done, Gallup poll, it's done in November before the primary, and it's a national vote preference, and it says, well, if the election were held today, of course the election isn't being held today, it's a month from now, and so Giuliani over Thompson, 28 to 19. Well, same question, only we asked first the question, in this split half experiment, again, it was a Gallup question, said, have you made up your mind about who you're going to vote for, or do you think you might change your mind? The real truth here is at that same point in time, 74% said, I hadn't really made up my mind. The other 24%, nobody's more than 5%. So the true answer in November of 2007 is that nobody has made up their mind, okay? But this doesn't make a good story. CNN doesn't run this. They run this. You know, President Giuliani, President Thompson. There's a flash of the pan, right? All right. I submit to you which is a more honest reflection of what public opinion is. I think it's this. That's not a sexy story. This is the only one that you'll ever see in almost any media. Because nobody wants to write a story that says, well, there's an election coming up next year, and you know the truth is nobody's thought about it. That's the truth. Democratic side. This is now a little bit more focused, because this is New Hampshire. I mean, those people think about politics early. You know, November, a year in advance, you say, well, with the general public, that's, you know, well, of course, it's a year off. Well, in November, or September rather, this is September before a January primary in New Hampshire, the first people to really, along with the Iowans, to think about politics. If you asked if the election were held today, you know, Clinton over Obama, 43-20. But now applying the same, and so you say, well, and you remember what the press was at this time. You know, Hillary has this thing locked up, it's a foregone conclusion, it's all over, right? And if you believe this number, that's a reasonable conclusion. But a split half experiment, you know what a split half experiment means? You take your equivalent sample, you randomly assign people to one of two conditions. One half you ask this question to, the other half you ask the question, well, there's an election coming up, a primary election in our state. Have you made up your mind about who you're going to vote for? 55%, I haven't made up my mind yet. Clinton still leads Obama, but this is she's down to 24%. That is a completely different set of numbers. These kind of numbers are reflective of a very fluid situation. These numbers suggest it's almost all over, okay? Again, these are the only numbers that both of these polls were done. This one doesn't see the light of day because it's not a story that news people think will be of interest.